So let's let's go ahead and bring out Bradley. Thank you. Bradley, come on out, man.
Hey, how's it going?
Great. So I think we'll get into it, and I think for everybody that's in the building that didn't Google you before we sat down.
There's a lot of not true things about me on Google.
Okay,
too, just so we're clear.
Yeah. So I think it'd be great just to give a little background about what you
Sure.
have done to this point and what you're working on now.
Yeah, so I've got kind of had a weird career, but pretty interesting, at least to me. Started off in government and politics. So I was Mike Bloomberg's campaign manager when he was running for mayor. Worked for him at City Hall. Just found myself wrapped up in a presidential campaign as of a couple of days ago again, now that Mike's running. I was the deputy governor of Illinois for 4 years. I spent a couple of years on Capitol Hill as Chuck Schumer's communications director. Started my first company about 10 years ago. The first business was a consulting firm that runs big campaigns for big companies. So you're Walmart and you're trying to open up stores in 6 major downtowns, and you've got zoning issues and union issues and community issues. We figured that all out. And then in early 2011 when I pivoted into tech, and it was an accident. I was sitting in a meeting and a friend of mine called and said, hey, there's this guy with a small transportation startup. He's having some regulatory problems. Would you mind talking to him? I become Uber's first political advisor that day. I get really lucky when Travis calls me back and says, I can't afford your fee. I mean, this was early Uber. Would you take equity? I didn't even know what equity meant, but I said yes. I then spent the next couple of years just kicking the shit out of the taxi industry all over the US to legalize ride sharing. And then, of course, Uber became Uber. And I realized it was a pretty interesting business there. So as the value of that went up, launched a venture capital fund called Tusk Ventures, where we invest in startups kind of early stage at the intersection of tech and politics. So if you know, for example, we invested in Bird, and then we helped legalize scooters everywhere, or we invested in FanDuel, and then we legalized fantasy sports, or we invested in Lemonade, and then got them their license to sell insurance. So things like that. We're investing out of our second fund right now. We'll start raising fund 3 pretty soon, typically seed and Series A, so kind of earlier stage deals. And then separate from that, thanks to Uber, I now have my own family foundation. So I'm trying to create a world where everyone can vote in elections on their phone over the blockchain. So we've been funding and running different elections. Thank you. The outputs follow the inputs. With the exception of Mike Bloomberg, I have never worked with for or against a politician that didn't make every single decision based on the next election and nothing else. They can't live without the validation that comes with being somebody, with holding office. You know, they've got these like holes in their psyche, and it fills this hole for them. And so they're never, ever going to vote against something just because it's the right thing to do. So let's say you're a Republican congressman from Florida, and your district is gerrymandered, which means the primary is the only election that really matters because they kind of rig the maps, and turnout is 12% in your primary. You may know that an assault weapon ban makes sense. You probably know that people shouldn't be walking around with AK-47s. But if the NRA is half that 12%, you're never going to vote for an assault weapon ban because that would be the same thing as giving up your seat. And ask them to do that. It's like asking all of us to not have oxygen. They can't even conceive of it. But now imagine the turnout were 60% or 70%. You would automatically vote for it because most people in your district want an assault weapon ban. Most rational people think that's probably a pretty good idea. So if turnout were 60 or 70%, it would reflect that. So what I learned when we were mobilizing all these people over time, about 3 million Uber customers, either emailed or tweeted or texted or did something, and that's how we beat the taxi industry, is that we mobilized real people. So I was thinking, hey, what if we could do the same thing but with voting? So that when blockchain came along, it was like, oh, now there's a way to do this securely. And so we have been funding and running elections around the country. Started in West Virginia. They did it for deployed military. We've now done elections in Utah, Oregon, Washington State, and Colorado as well. I've paid for the cost of administering these elections, so I don't have to deal with RFPs and budgets and that kind of stuff. But the idea is to prove that mobile voting is safe and that it works. And my hope is that once we let the genie out of the bottle, kind of like what we did with Uber, people will start to demand it. And then once they do, turnout goes from 10, 12%. You know, I don't know how many of you are de Blasio fans or not. I am not, to be very clear. But he won both those elections, about 300,000 votes in the primary, which is about 4% of the city's population. if you don't like them, that's 4% of the city picked them, and that's why we have what we have. So if you want politicians that are representative of everyone's views, and you want people in Washington to actually get things done on immigration or climate or healthcare or guns or anything else, you got to radically increase turnout. And the only way that's going to happen is by letting people vote on their phone. So spending a lot of my time on that. And then finally, a little bit of a media business. So I wrote a book last year called The Fixer. It's being turned into a fictional half-hour TV show right now about a campaign to legalize flying cars in New York, Austin, and LA. I wrote the show, which was really fun. I have a podcast called Firewall on iTunes, and a column that I write for the New York Daily News. That's about it. Does that answer the question?
That's not too much at all. So I mean, for everyone that's in this room tonight, I think really what brought them here is a lot of people listen to that long list of accomplishments, and really we'll break it down. But each one of those accomplishments really was, I would say, the mixture of having a vision and just riding out towards execution and doing the little things every day to get you there. And so when we talk about Uber, when we talk about Bird, we talk about a venture capital fund, we talk about a presidential campaign, a lot of us in this room may feel like, hey, these are things that I'm just trying to get my own life together. How do I even make these kinds of goals and aspirations even tangible? And I think the idea behind this series is to just talk about people and talk about ways and talk to people who have actually been able to figure out how to either make their passion their profession and make the right investments of time and money so that they can set up, as you have, a family foundation. And so for someone that's in this room that might just be rubbing two nickels together, maybe have $150 in their bank account and want to get on the pathway to making the right decisions in terms of investments of time and money, were you ever at that place in your life?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. So, I'm a first-generation American. We didn't grow up with any money. And then I worked in government and politics. My first job in politics, I was the spokesman for the New York City Parks Department, and the pay was $22,000 a year. Which, by the way, it felt okay at the time. Obviously, it wasn't a lot of money, but, I lived within it. And basically,
what year was that?
This was 95.
95, $22,000 a year.
And basically all the way through working in government, salary went up a little bit, but not by a lot because it's government, and it was okay. And then kind of the turning point was when we won the mayoral race in 2009, Mike gave me a $400,000 bonus. It was $234,000 after taxes. And I remember saying to my wife, because we had no other money, like we're worth exactly $234,000. And I'm gonna start a business, and when this number dips down to like 70 grand, I'm gonna have to go get a job somewhere. But I think I've got a little bit of room to try. And then I started my first company. And I think the thing that I did that I'm, in retrospect, happy that I did was I had a pretty clear vision for offering something that no one else was doing yet. It wasn't a giant sort of revelation in the scheme of the world, but at least within political consulting, it was different and new. And I set the value for what I thought my time was worth, and I really stuck to that. And it was really hard at first because I was asking for a lot more money than most people get, and I didn't have any clients or anything else. But, one worked, second worked, and then all of a sudden success breeds success, and it kind of built from there. And we're going pretty strong. But yeah, I know exactly what that's like.
Sure. And so let's just talk about that moment, right? You got $234,000, and you sit down, you have a conversation with your wife, and you say, I'm willing to risk 2/3 of this till I get down to 70,000. Then we'll think about getting a job. What gives you the kind of confidence at that moment in your life to say, look, I'm going to take 2/3 of my life savings and make a bet on this value proposition that I believe in?
I mean, so fundamentally, you know what? It almost sounds not that I like to sell. And if you really like to sell and you're really good at it, and your idea is halfway decent and you can execute on it. So if all those things are true, you can make money, right? And I thought I had a pretty good idea, and I felt like I was pretty qualified to do it. But I also knew that if I can get in the room with people more times than not, I can convince them of the value proposition that I had to offer. And that started to succeed, and the press started writing about it. That would give me more and more credibility. and I could kind of build a business from there. So I think that was really it. Also, I've only ever had like one real job. I was at Lehman Brothers right when they went bankrupt, and I got to tell you, I was there for about a year and a half, and they were actually really, the people I worked with were really nice people, but I was so bored. It was this giant bureaucracy, and I was running this business to privatize state lotteries, and I was flying around from state capital to state capital 5 days a week. I wasn't into it at all, and I kind of knew that while I wanted to make money, and I believe very strongly in making money, that I would just enjoy it a lot more if I was doing my own thing than if I was part of some big organization.
For you, if you had to reverse engineer that moment of going from $22,000 a year, working, kind of making ends meet, and then deciding, hey, I'm gonna invest my time and energy in this project with this person, were you thinking about an advance or a bonus at that time, or were you just thinking about the actual passion behind it?
I was just, I think the thing that I did that in retrospect made sense, but it's not like I think I understood it on the front end, is I spent the first 15 years of my career just generating as many skills and relationships and kind of experiences as possible. And I didn't really worry that much about how much money any particular, as long as I could pay the bills. And look, once we had kids, it got harder and harder, obviously. But when you're single, it's not as hard. And ultimately, in having all these different types of experiences and knowing all these different types of people, I was able to figure out how I could put something together that no one else has quite done yet, and really double down on that. And so, I do think that if the goal is ultimately to try to make a lot of money, you're better off on the early side, just learning as much as possible, doing as much as possible, figuring out what makes you unique, and then turning that into a business. And by the way, to really make a lot of money, what I've learned is you have to have a really high risk tolerance, right? You don't get rich working for somebody else.
That's right. That's right. And as you choose the folks, I would say outside of money, right, which you can exchange for food and Uber rides, et cetera, you've got time. And you've got to make very smart investments really early on in where you invest your time. So I'm hearing you correctly when you say you invest your time in acquiring skills. So that means, listen, you get is that having a great mentor? Is that going back to school? Is that learning on the internet? And then you've got to choose the people in whom you want to invest your time. And so talk a little bit about just in those early days, what were the habits that you formed around building great relationships?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And one of the things that I learned, so I worked for a lot of politicians, right? And one of the things was to learn from them both what to do and what not to do, right? So like in Illinois, I worked for a guy named Rod Blagojevich that he's now in the middle of a 14-year jail sentence for corruption. I learned a lot from Rod of what not to do. And he also had some really tremendous skills that were worth emulating as well. So part of it was trying to figure out really what are the things that they're doing that you admire and why? And then just as much, what are they doing that you really don't like and why? And how do you kind of draw logical theses around these? And then when you do meet someone that you really just truly admire, and for me that was Mike Bloomberg, you really just double down on it completely. In fact, one of the ways when Mike hired me to run his campaign in 2009, it was literally, so the Lehman Brothers files for bankruptcy. I'm sitting in my office, I'm kind of staring out the window basically, and the phone rings and it's Mike. And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, because we'd worked, I said, "I think you know what I'm doing." He's like, "Yeah, come see me." And I went to City Hall. I was like, "I'm going to run for a third term. I need you to change the long-term limits and then run the campaign." But that was, for a guy that had just come out of a bankrupt company, right? It was a really big investment and show of confidence. And so, I just worked like a lunatic, man. So I would send him every day at 5 a.m. an email that said, "Here's who's endorsing you today. Here's what the polls are. Here was the door knocks last night. Here what's on TV." And I was probably working 17 hours a day, 6-7 days a week. But A, I really got to spend a lot of time with him and really learned a lot from him. And B, a lot of those same practices and habits are things that I then put right into my company. And they're things that, even if I don't still do them now, people who work for me do.
Right. And let's actually backtrack before that phone call happened. To be top of mind to someone like Michael Bloomberg when he's running, how did you guys even build that kind of rapport where he says, "Okay, who can run my campaign and you're one of the, if not the first phone call.
Yeah, I hope I was the first phone call. So, I had a weird experience in that I went to work for Mike. I was working in the Senate for Schumer. So I had a pretty big job because Chuck Schumer is the most media-hungry member of Congress. I used to say the most in Washington, but now obviously Trump is more than Chuck, so Chuck's number two. But when you're in charge of Chuck's press, it's a big job, right? And he was a senior U.S. Senator from New York. But I left that and took a step back to work in the Bloomberg administration in kind of a less prominent role because I really wanted to learn other skills than just how to deal with the media. So I think Mike kind of appreciated that I came in from a big job. Then in Mike's first year, he really wasn't doing that well. Like a lot of things that turned out to be good things to do, like the smoking ban, were actually very unpopular at the time. And so I had this idea. I said, listen, we're not going to reelect this guy and his charm and charisma. We got to prove out some different value proposition. To your point earlier, I believe he's the most kind of competent, ethical, transparent mayor we've ever had. And so I had this idea of let's make a list of every single thing you promised in the campaign, and let's put out a report that says where every single one of them stands, whether we did them, we didn't do them, we failed, we succeeded, because the point isn't what we've achieved, is that you are so transparent and you are so ethical that is just different from everyone else. Any other politician, when you pitch that to them, would have just fired you on the spot. Mike loved it because he's Mike. And we did that and it worked. And, it kind of helped turn around his image and set him on the right course. And then I left to go run the state of Illinois, where I was in charge of, $70 billion budget, every state employee, operations, legislation, policy, communication. So I left for a big job. And so I think in some ways, I kind of came in from the big, was there for a little while, did something they thought was really cool, left for something big. And so I kind of occupied this space in his head. But I also made a point of staying in touch with him, right? Which is a little hard to do because he's still the mayor of New York City. You don't really want to bother him too much. But, when I was in town, I would go by City Hall, and if he was around, just a couple of minutes chatting with him. And then had enough different things where I kind of get worked into the schedule. And if I was in town, they'd bring me to dinner or whatever it was. And so, I made sure he remembered me enough that, when they realized they needed someone to run this new campaign, I was the person he thought of.
For sure. Now, there's something that you just touched on. You said running was it $70 billion budget, right? So what lessons would you say that you took away from running that size of a budget that could be applied to someone's personal finances, right?
Yeah, it's a great question. So the first thing is obviously government, even when it's well run, is not well run in the slightest, right? So everyone should be running their personal finances better than government runs any of its finances. But look, you know what? The key is always revenue. Maybe it's because I own a business and I'm always thinking about P&L. And especially the P part of it, and to me, selling is fun, right? And it was whether it was how do we generate revenue by coming up with some new stream. Like the reason when I was at Lehman that we were privatizing state lotteries, I had this idea of saying, hey, our state lottery, government may be good at certain things, but running a gambling business is not one of them. Let's sell this to a private company and let's make a lot more money on this thing. So to me, it was generating revenue is always my top priority, even today. No matter what's on my schedule, if there's a big contract at hand, I'm going to put down what I'm doing and make sure that we get it, or at least take our best shot at it. I learned that, but also I learned, just to take a step back into the politics of today right now, what's interesting is you're watching this presidential campaign and you're seeing kind of these different philosophies of government, and you're watching people like Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders talk about kind of income inequality, which they're right about, and taxing the rich, which I think they were also right about, but then kind of taking it all into government and then solving all the world's problems through government programs. Having run the fifth biggest state in America, there's things the government does well, but most things they do not do that well, right? And just confiscating people's wealth to turn into government programs and think that's going to solve the problem. What I learned in Illinois is sometimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't. And you've got to be thoughtful, right? So all these people on the right saying that government's bad and taxes are bad and all that, it's not true. And everyone on the left saying that money is bad and government can solve everything, that's not true, right? The reality is every single thing is based on the context, and it's case specific, and you got to be thoughtful enough to think through it for yourself.
Yeah, actually, that brings us to another point of talking about the presidential election that's happening right now and starting to get underway. Big election 2020. Everyone's really on the edge of their seat to see.
Did you see what happened tonight? Hillary said now she might get in. I swear to God, I know, but that was right as I was walking in here from the conference room. She had she said many people are urging her to run. I think many people was her like dog and Bill Clinton, but whatever, you know.
Yeah. So I think one of the most interesting concepts that's emerged in this presidential campaign, especially that applies to folks that are really worried about either revenue or income, is this concept of universal basic income. And what are the ramifications of, in your opinion, of literally giving everyone a universal basic income?
Do you guys know what? So it's a pretty esoteric. You and I are in the tech world, so we kind of know this thing. It's a really popular idea in Silicon Valley. For those of you who've been watching Andrew Yang's presidential campaign, this is his big idea. And basically, it really just kind of takes the Warren Sanders concept and says we're going to tax wealth of people who have a lot of money, but rather than putting it through government programs, which tend to get watered down and ineffective, we're just going to give people a dividend. And we're going to put the money in their pockets, and they will decide how to spend it. And some people will waste it on all kinds of stupid shit, but some people will start businesses, and some people will pay off debt, and some people will pay for school, and that will ultimately create a lot more good than just running the whole thing through a big government bureaucracy. I got to say, I kind of like the idea because I do think that there's no need for someone to have 10 or 50 or $100 billion, or even a couple of $100 million isn't really necessary. And at the same time, I also know from having run a government that if you just put it back in the tax coffers, most of it's going to be wasted. So I have more faith in the average person to do something with the money that benefits their lives. And so this is the idea. It's one of these things where, like, it sounds crazy right now, but I think where Andrew Yang specifically is adding some real value to this is he's not going to be president, but by putting this idea out there in a thoughtful way, it starts to kind of get socialized with people, start to think about it. It'll seem a little less crazy in 4 years, a little less crazy 8 years from now. And then as automation really kicks in, so whether it's autonomous cars or trucks or artificial intelligence or all these things that will, at least for a temporary period of time, really disrupt the workforce, and you're going to have a lot of people out of work, you're really going to want to give people, some way to get through all of that. Eventually, history shows that new technologies create more jobs than they destroy, but that doesn't happen at the minute of the transition, right? It happens over a 20, 30-year period. So just like the car obviously offers a lot more jobs than the horse did, but there were horse buggy people that went out of business, right, in 1897 or whatever it was, or 1903, and I'm sure that was really hard for them. We're going to have the equivalent of that now in the next 10, 20 years with a lot of new types of technology. So the idea of universal basic income is, in order to blunt the impact of that, in order to redistribute wealth, but do it in a way that doesn't just trust government to be able to spend it wisely. That's the concept. So I find it really interesting. I think it's going to be a while until it actually happens, but it's one of those ideas that, now that for those of you who knew about it, you already knew about it. For those of you who did not, it's the kind of thing now that you'll kind of notice it from here to there, and it'll perk your interest.
Right. And let's say that we're still 5 years or 8 years away from universal basic income. I want to touch on something you talked about, and that is, being really focused in your personal life and also in business, if you're a small business owner, on that P&L, and really being focused on the profit part, right? And so as everyone is in this age now of just almost universally accessible information, what are the skill sets that you believe someone who has time on their hands could invest in to make sure that they have an edge in this new age of automation, especially coming from the technology background you have?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is, look, I think that especially if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you got to have a really, really, really unique idea, right? It can't just be like, hey, here's a different kind of the 18th different type of Uber. Like, the real Uber did pretty well, but after a while, like all the knockoff ideas. So one is you got to be really creative. And I think almost when someone says to you, like, why would anyone use that product? Like, you have to have a really good answer, right? I can't tell you how many people come in and pitch us, at our fund, and they kind of point to some other company and say, well, we'll be like them. And I'm like, you're not like them, because they actually succeeded, and you're just pointing to them and asking me to give you money in the hopes that maybe you're like them. Now, I'm not that stupid. So one is you got a really good idea. Two is you got to be pretty risk friendly, and you got to know yourself. So if you like taking risk and you're entrepreneurial and you're really willing to put it all out there, you can do really well. But you also can lose everything, right? That happens to a lot of people every single day. And there are people who are maybe, not as risk friendly. It's important to know yourself, because if ultimately you're going to wake up with your stomach hurting every morning because everything's at stake every day, and you'd be happier being part of someone else's organization, knowing yourself is really, really important. So that's number 2. Number 3, I would argue, is writing. Nobody can write. And as a result, when people can write, is an incredibly valuable skill. It's so much easier with the people that we hire when someone can do that. And it's just, I don't know if it's because schools don't teach writing well, or people just don't really focus on it, or everyone's writing in 140 characters these days. And but that to me is a really, really useful skill. And then, you know what? I think this has probably been true for all of time, but discipline and execution. Some people talk a good game, but you gotta get shit done. And the people who can make things happen end up doing really well.
As you look back on all the different milestones that you've set for yourself and either achieved or maybe missed, what would you say are the biggest what would you say is your biggest miss, and what recalibration did you have to do in order to learn from it and then actually bounce back from it as well?
Yeah, I mean, a few things. So first of all, I had 2 jobs in a row. So one is I'm deputy governor in Illinois for Rob Blagojevich. He gets arrested, indicted on 24 different counts, and sent to jail for 14 years. Then my next job is at Lehman Brothers, and they take down the entire global economy, right? So when I'm at the Bloomberg campaign, I'm thinking, holy shit, if I lose this campaign, I will literally never get another job in the rest of my life. And so it was rocky. And with Illinois, I have testified now in a total of 3 corruption trials and 2 grand juries. I've only ever been a witness, thank God, but it is terrifying. When the FBI shows up at your house or in your office and tells you they're investigating, and they want you to think that you're under investigation because they want you to give them information. Well, by the way, just so we're clear, if the FBI ever shows up in your home or your office, the only thing you say is, my lawyer will call you. Do not ever talk to them. If you take one thing from this talk, that's the one. But yeah, I mean, there are those moments where you're sitting there and you're thinking well, I don't think I did anything wrong, but maybe they think I did, and I'm going to go to prison, right? And it's really terrifying. So, you have those moments for sure. I've started businesses that have failed. I started a casino management company that I thought I was so smart and I was so stupid. I did this deal with the Chukchansi Indian tribe out in Fresno, California. So their casino was closed because 2 different factions of the Chukchansi tribe had an argument, which ended in an armed shootout inside the casino during operating hours. So the place gets closed down, and I decide I'm going to get this thing reopened politically and we're going to operationally, and I'm going to run this casino with these guys. We do all of that. They don't pay us. Hey, you owe us, they end up being $21 million. Owe us all this money. And they said, we're a sovereign nation. Tribes are sovereign nations. You can't make us pay. And we went to court, and the judge agreed with them. And, we never saw a dime from those guys. And that was a really hard lesson. Probably the armed standoff should have been a sign to not work with these people, but in retrospect. So, yeah, and then look, as a venture capitalist, a third of my deals are supposed to go to zero. And some of them succeed, but a lot of them fail, right? And so in my job especially, you are failing every single day. And then the final point is this, which is, in looking ahead, so yeah, have things gone well for me? Sure, I wouldn't be sitting here if they hadn't. And am I happy about it? Yeah, of course I am. But, you end up kind of living in the present and in the future, you should. And so I look at all the things I'm doing now, and I'm just wrapped up in whether or not I can get those things done, right? And every single day, I'm negotiating, I can't name the platform, but the TV deal with this big streaming platform. And every day that something doesn't kind of move forward on that, I'm totally stressed out, right? Or, every time I'm raising a new venture fund, if some LP says no, we're expecting $20 million from them and we don't get it, I'm really stressed out. And so, part of it also is that for as long as you're in it, and I think if you're human, you want to be in it, there's never this moment where it's everything is good, right? It might be good for a minute or a vacation or whatever it is, but then you just go back to the same thing.
That's right. Now, how do you actually get into, you've raised how many venture funds now?
2 funds.
Two funds. Now, how do you even get? And I asked this for people in the room who are thinking to themselves, man, if I needed to borrow even $100 right now, I don't even know anyone in my family that has that could give it to me. You're raising a venture fund where, sometimes the LP commitments are 15 million, 20 million, 50 million, whatever it is. Where do those people actually live, and how do you actually get in touch with them?
So for really hard. So we talk about things that almost didn't work. I almost pulled the plug on our first venture fund 3 or 4 different times, in part because my background is not traditional venture capital banking. I came out of politics. I had this weird thesis that hey, I'm going to use politics to get into deals that people otherwise couldn't get into, and that's why it's going to be really lucrative for you. And our fund is done really, really well. But when I was trying to raise Fund 1, I'd meet with these LPs, and these are the people that, a pension fund, an insurance trust, someone that has that kind of money to write a check. And they don't want to meet with me. I realized it's because they want me to tell them stories about politics and Uber and stuff like that. And then when I'm yes, so you can invest? No. And it took us 2 years to raise the first fund.
How much did you raise in the first fund?
Fund 1 was $37 million. Right. And we probably did over 100 different meetings and got said no to by 85% of those people, maybe more. And it was depressing, man. You walk out of these rooms and, sometimes you can be that guy's an asshole, whatever. But a lot of times they're smart and they're competent and they're saying no. And you're they probably know something I don't. And so Fund 1 was really hard. And even Fund 2, Fund 1 did really, really well because we're technically in what's called a SEC quiet period. I can't give the numbers on it, but it did really well. And I thought that as a result, it'd be very easy to raise Fund 2 because I'd say, look, I was right. Look at my IRRs, off the charts. But still, in the world of venture, I'm considered really weird, right? Because it's this political guy who's fighting with people and, taking on cartels and all this shit. And no one really quite knows what to make of me in the venture world. We get people pay us a lot of attention, but they're not quite sure how to actually think about us. Even Fund 2, people are very risk averse, people who lend money or invest money. And it's hard, right? So I think I still haven't really mastered the art of raising money. But the one thing that I know is whether you're asking someone for $100 or for $10 million, you're gonna have to ask 50 before one says yes.
That's true. That's true. There's been a lot of talk that we've been really enjoying a great economic upturn over the last few years. And there's definitely been a lot of talk that we should start to brace ourselves for some correction in the economy. And so for folks that are starting to save now, put together a little nest egg, maybe they got a couple $1,000s they put away. And obviously you're not a investor, broker, you're not going to give people advice about what they should invest in, but maybe just some counsel or what you potentially are doing to be prepared in the event of an economic downturn.
Yeah, it's a good question. So interestingly, while I like investing in startups and our track record would say they were reasonably good at it, I actually am not that interested in managing my own money. So I have a family office that manages my money. But I, talk to them to figure out what they're up to. So some things that at least we're doing, right? So one is a little heavier in real estate right now, depending on where you're going, but a place like New York City, at least, it's not necessarily you're gonna make a ton of money on it, but absent something terrible happening, like a dirty bomb going off like that, it's gonna hold the value. So if you're looking for places to put money, I think real estate is one that right now makes sense. Also, they overbuilt so much in Manhattan and parts of Brooklyn and all of that there are actually pretty good deals to be had right now in the marketplace. So that's number one. Number two, muni bonds. We've been buying more and more munis. They're not high growth. You're getting 3%, 4%, 5% coupon, but they're very steady. And unless you believe that jurisdiction is going to declare bankruptcy, which is very rare that a government declares bankruptcy, you're going to see your money. So that I'm pulling out of hedge funds a little bit because I think that as a recession gets closer, the risk there goes up commensurately. I'm also in a position where because I'm in venture, I'm so heavily weighted into technology and venture capital, which is such a risky sector to be in, that I kind of need mostly other stuff in my portfolio to be pretty conservative to try to balance it out. And so, yeah, I'm trying to just sort of at least assume that there will be. I think Trump will do everything he can to prevent a recession before his election because he wants to get reelected. So whatever triggers he can pull. So you see the Fed keeps cutting interest rates. Today, I think Kramer or someone sort of floated the idea of like a middle-class tax cut. They're going to do every gimmick they can to keep things going for the next roughly 12 months. But even if they're able to do that, at some point, the ceiling of the bottom falls out always. So I do think it's worth being prepared for. And also in my world of venture capital, it's already happening, right? So WeWork, you guys probably all have been watching, like just utterly collapsed over the last month or so. Even Uber, the valuation in the last private round they did was almost $80 billion. And if you buy the stock today, it's around $40 billion. So a lot of private valuations are really falling significantly once they hit the public markets. And so, in some ways, the correction's already underway.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that with those corrections being underway, what are the places that folks could actually read? If they had to put a reading list together, hey, this is where you actually go in the mornings, whether it's on your way to work, when you wake up, to say, okay, maybe the recession's not here, it's on its way. These are the indicators, these are the signals that I should be looking out for, and where are those places, where are those outlets for you?
What I try to do is consume a lot of information, and I may go through it all pretty quickly, but over the course of a week, a month, a year, there's so much in me that I can start sifting through and thinking through and developing conclusions that are not totally illogical. So I read through newspapers every morning. I read the Times, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Post. The Post, my 10-year-old son and I read together every morning, which is questionable practice. It's fun. We like doing it. He's learned about a lot of things in the world that probably he shouldn't know about just yet, but we like doing it. And then, the whole bunch of different, whether it's, for me in the venture world, Term Sheet, Strictly VC, I like Business Insider, I like Axios. There's a whole bunch of newsletters. I subscribe to the Washington Post as well, and I'll kind of flip through that if I have time to do that. So it's a combination of that, and then I read a ton of books. And basically, I know this isn't probably great, I read a lot of fiction. And I think in a weird way, even though it's not necessarily me accumulating specific knowledge, it's spurring my subconscious, right? And I'm thinking about stuff, and I think that helps me think through real world problems, whether it's a political problem I have to solve or a venture problem or something else. So I read a lot of fiction, some nonfiction as well. I'm reading a book right now called The Meritocracy Trap that's pretty dense but really smart, and I was reading it on the Uber over here. So, and I read a ton, right? You put me on the subway, I'm reading a book. You put me in a car, I'm reading a book. I'm waiting for something to start, I'm reading a book. Now, often it's a book on my phone because I can't carry around a book with me all the time. But like I try to read as much as I possibly can.
Yeah, for sure. Now, when you think about all of the information that you're synthesizing, I think what could be a good takeaway is for someone that's even interested right now. Obviously, there is now the opportunity for folks who are non-accredited investors to get into venture deals, which I personally believe, unless you're ready to risk it all and potentially lose it, it's a very risky practice. You got to have a high risk tolerance to even get into some of these venture deals. For someone that wants to educate themselves about just venture in general, is there a great book?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there's a bunch of different books. Ben Horowitz from Andreessen Horowitz has written some really good books. Scott Kapoor, who's a partner in Andreessen, actually just came out with a book that I bought yesterday that I think looks pretty good. There are different podcasts. So, for example, there's one called Origins that's really smart about it. There are newsletters like Term Sheet and Strictly VC that are really good. So there's lots of different ways to get information about it, and it's worth learning a lot. I would agree with you, though, that if you're not an accredited investor, the odds of you making money at a venture deal are really, really low, because if you're seeing it, it means that me and every other top VC already said no to it. And we could be wrong, but like, we're in business because more often we're right than we're wrong, right? So like, you're only seeing it if you're just an individual. Like, if you are Like I noticed we did some the other day, and like I saw Kevin Durant was on the cap table. He's Kevin Durant, sure, he can do that, right? But if you're just a random person and you're seeing a venture deal, it's probably too good to be true.
That is a great point, and I think that it's also tricky because there's so much wealth that's been created, that's been publicized, right? And a lot of it is that America really always loves a great success story, a rags to riches story, a 0 to 100 in 2, 3, 4 years, right? And at the same time, with all of those successes, the pathway to those successes is littered with hundreds, if not thousands, of companies that just didn't make it. Really went to zero. Investors lost all of their money. And so to be a great entrepreneur, I think I want to go back to just that point that you made around being focused on revenue and being focused on profit. Now, when you first start a business, a lot of people say, look, you first start a business, you're not going to make money, right? You're going to be investing money. You might be upside down the first year, et cetera. What are the indicators to you that tell you that on a daily basis, you're actually getting to the money? Is it the right conversations? Is it the right people? Is it referrals?
Yeah.
Is it advertising, marketing?
I mean, it's a combination of different things, right? So the first thing is, what kind of business is it, right? So there are, most people who seek venture money don't actually need venture money. It sounds cool to say, oh, I'm backed by this venture capital fund. But in reality, we take a huge chunk of your business for not that much. Like you only do it if you need like incredible amounts of money and there's just no way to get off the ground without it. Like every company that I own, like I've bootstrapped, right? And I took that $234,000 now as my starting capital, which wasn't nothing, but wasn't millions of dollars either. And just kind of like relentlessly just pursued revenue. So in my day-to-day business, I'm literally just looking at, accounts receivable and cash on hand. I have a CFO that, tells me this stuff now. I don't have to do it myself, but like, I'm still thinking about all that stuff all the time. With our portfolio companies, it's interesting because on one hand, you're supposed to care mostly about metrics of growth. Because if you are an early stage startup, what you want to see is growth like this, because the theory is profitability will then follow. But as you're looking right now at how a lot of big tech IPOs have gone in the last year, where the notion is like, trust me, it'll work out, the market's starting to say, like, I don't trust you, right? Until you show me real profitability, I'm not going to reward you. And so I think it's really trying to figure out, how can this company, like for us, it's never worth investing in a startup if we don't think it can be $1 billion company. We're often wrong about it, but we have to believe that it can be, which means they've got to at least be able to generate $100 million in revenue. And to do that, like, we need to really drill down with these people and say, like, not just like, oh yeah, if I do this, this, and this, it'll work out, but like, how are you actually gonna get to this number? Why? Based on what metrics? And you got to hold them accountable, right? Like when we lead a deal for a company, we sit on the board, and board meetings can be pretty unpleasant, right? Because you just put a couple $1 million into the deal, and then all of a sudden, the growth rates aren't there, or they're not hitting the right metrics, or they can't retain talent, or whatever it is. And so, there's a mix between being supportive of their portfolio companies and also actually, some real governance. And look, if you think about part of the whole WeWork disaster, part of it was that the board were so afraid of Adam Newman, who's the CEO, that they didn't try to really employ any type of governance or guidance or rules. And then the wheels really, really fell off. So you kind of have to do that. It's almost like being a parent in some ways.
Yeah, for sure. So just going back to that day that you decided to start your business, you open up for business day one. Do you just go through your Rolodex and start making phone calls? Is that how you get it off?
Some of it, although one thing I learned is like people who you think, oh yeah, they're definitely going to hire me, they're definitely going to invest, often never do. And then people you would never expect kind of come out of nowhere. But I learned a few things. One is people don't really give away money. So like when people hire us, especially early on, it's because they really needed us and they had to believe that I could deliver for them. And absent that, like, you just don't really get hired. So it can't be like just expecting a relationship or you've known someone for a long time to automatically do it. You got to be able to show them, here's why you need me. Here's how it's going to solve this specific problem for you or make you money in this way. And if you can't show them that, they shouldn't hire you. They shouldn't give you money. And so some of it was my contacts, but then I was starting to realize, like, it's not just like, hey, I know you and you know me, so shouldn't you hook me up? It's like, here's your problem, and here's how I can solve it for you. And that's why you should hire us. You should invest in our fund, whatever the deal at hand was. And I think really understanding that was really critical. That's one. And then two is, we live in a world where you kind of have to tell your story, right? And so one of the ways that we took off as a business is in 2010, when I first started my first company, the charter school movement was really, really big in New York City and all over the country. And Albany was limiting the number of charter schools that New York City could have. And the teachers union hates charter schools because the members of the charter schools are not unionized. And so they were blocking the expansion of it. And Bloomberg said to me, like, hey, I need to get this bill passed in Albany, go figure it out. And so we ran kind of a real political electoral style campaign around this one issue in a way that kind of no one had done before. And we just beat the crap out of the teachers union, right? I was just like, no one really had walked out to them before and kind of punched them in the face. And we did. And they were so surprised that it worked. And then what we did that was smart was, like, I ran with that. And like anyone who was in the education world that I thought there was some sort of revenue opportunity, it's like, here's what I did. And here are the articles about it. Here's the New York Times story about it. And that validation is really, really critical. And you like to think that it shouldn't matter. But even now, we sent a proposal, we sent a deck to an LP. There's pages and pages of PDFs of articles about me and articles about us. And when you succeed, you got to validate it.
Right, for sure. We've got a little bit of time left, and I know that, first of all, let's give a round of applause to Bradley. I think it's been
Thank you.
Incredible conversation.
Well, and to Ryan, so I give talks all the time. You're the best moderator I've seen in years. So that was amazing.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.